Okay, so we are back at the Law&Crime Network, and we are breaking down this Leon Williams case. And for those of you who may have just joined us, first of all, it's great to be back on with you. It's a really fascinating case, and, you know, we say that in the legal world, and what we mean by that, it's like really sad. There's a lot of meat to the bones of this case. It's something that's bringing attention to child abuse, which ultimately led to the death of a 10-year-old boy who was through foster homes for 7 years of his life. I get goosebumps when I think about it, and is now dead. And now his foster father, or his father, is now on trial for having killed him. And there's some really bad testimony coming out, not only with respect to statements that he would make to that little boy that you see on the screen about, you're going to get beat tonight and I'm going to kill him and you're going to die tonight, but all of this testimony about the boy's feet being burned, holding him underwater for 30 to 45 seconds over and over again repeatedly. Foster care, Child Protective Services have been there on a number of occasions. 3 workers have now been fired from Child Protective Services because they didn't spot this. But we have a great and fascinating opportunity, because it's one thing to be sitting here in a studio and talking about a case and watching it like you folks are, but it's a completely different feel when you are inside the courtroom. And I have with me right now Josh Sharpe. He's from the Atlanta Journal Constitution News. He's a reporter, and if you see him wobbling a little bit, give him a little bit of a break. Because if I understand, Josh, you have a broken leg, but nevertheless, you're standing up for us here at the Law&Crime Network. Is that right?
If you want to get technical, I broke 2 legs, but yeah. Anyway, yeah.
Okay. Well, listen,
so
that's
forgive
even.
me if I shift a little.
That's even more impressive that you can stand with 2 broken legs. Hey, Josh, listen, we've been talking a lot in the studio about this case, and I'm curious about the emotional impact, because I'm a big believer. I always use that Maya Angelou quote: "It's not what you say, it's not what you do, it's how you make people feel." And as prosecutors, or even as a defense lawyer, you want to get into that emotional space. So I'm told that there was actually testimony where one of the jurors was crying. Did you see that? And what was the feel going on at that time?
I did see that. They played the entire initial interview. It's broken into 2 parts. They played the entire interview with Mr. Williams, and basically I would describe it as a series of plain lies. For a long time, he was essentially trying to put the blame on the child himself, because it said the child had self-harming behaviors because of his mental challenges. I think that probably caused a lot of the emotion in the room. By the time the juror broke down, it had gotten to the point in the tape where Mr. Williams himself broke down and said that he had, in fact, held the child underwater, and that he did, in fact, believe that that may have caused his death. Then, one moment later, a juror, who I would say as a middle-aged woman who, very likely could have had a son, would be the right age to have a kid, Kente's age. She raised her hand, and tears were pouring down her face, and the judge asked if she needed a break, and she nodded her head that she did, and she walked out. Also, during this testimony, I kept an eye on the caseworker, one of the caseworkers who testified yesterday, and this is a woman who, I won't mispronounce her name because I didn't catch it, but she is somebody who worked with Kente for several years, and she helped set up this adoption. And she said, she spoke of seeing no signs of trouble. In fact, she thought that that the child and adopted father got along. But she, in her time with this child, really grew to love him. At one point, she even considered adopting him herself. However, that would have meant she would have had to quit her job because of the rules at the Child Protective Services. Anyway, during this testimony today, where Mr. Williams is lying, and I could say that because he would tell you now that he was lying. While he's telling about what, suggesting that Kente did this to himself, and then slowly breaking down and admitting that Kente did not do this to himself. I'm watching this caseworker, and she's just sobbing uncontrollably. Unfortunately, I'm sobbing to the point that that her torso's thrusting forward, and she's shaking her knee, and she's closing her eyes like she's praying. It's just it's getting sort of raw, or during that the playing of that tape of that interview, it got pretty raw in the courtroom.
Wow, I mean, that's really compelling. So what I am hearing you say is that if you were a defense attorney in that court, you got some concerns about what's going on. This is very visceral, raw data that is not boding well for the defendant. Is that fair to say, Josh?
Well, I would say that I'm certainly not a defense attorney. I'm also not a prosecutor. I'm also not a juror. I can't offer any kind of opinion about this. I will say that when the defense attorney had a chance, as they always do, to cross-examine the detective, he rose and said that he had no questions. So what
do you anticipate the defense is going to go with this case? Just give up, or are they going to pose a defense?
Well, I believe that they're going to pose a defense. That's what they alluded to in opening statements. Essentially, the idea being that the defense attorney conceded yesterday that Mr. Williams did cause the death of his son, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it was a murder. So this is going to come down to some technicalities in the law. What is murder? What is manslaughter? What is intent? What is that sort of thing. In a case like this, in my experience, sometimes jurors will be, and I'll say I have there's no way to know right now if this will happen or not. But in cases like this, sometimes the jury will be given the option to convict on lesser charges,
right,
such as involuntary manslaughter, which would mean essentially in Georgia that would mean that you killed someone but you didn't mean to, or voluntary, which means you killed them but you meant to, but it's not quite murder.
Right. Just in 5 seconds or less, anything positive for the defendant that came out?
I would say in the interview when he finally did break down and start to tell the truth, he was very emotional. That could play well for the jury. However, when he was telling the story that he now acknowledges is false, he wasn't very emotional. So I think this could be tough. However, the trial's not over, and I know there will be a lot more testimony. I know the defense has witnesses to call.
All right, Josh, we got to get back to something else. Josh Sharpe from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution News, a reporter with 2 broken legs. He did a great job, and he didn't even wobble as far as I was concerned. So thank you very much, Josh. I hope you have a good day. Okay, take care.
You too. Take care.
Thank you.